Agnar is absolutely insane. This deck can really crush any opponent that's not prepared for it. And what you're starting to see is that this deck is so prominent and so strong that people are running counters to this deck. And so we are in currently, I would say, a tier 1 meta. You have Agnar, you have the counters to Agnar, and then you have everything else. Now, the trick is, if you are running a counter to Agnar, you might win against an Agnar deck. And we might watch a couple of videos of that. But I just want to give you a quick video showcasing how quickly or how strong this deck can be. Let me see if we can find a good replay for that. Meanwhile, you can see all of these games here with Raikka. It's got a very strong win ratio, and we're winning most of our games here. I think what I want to watch is this one. So let's just go ahead and watch this replay of just showcasing how strong Agnar can be. And this is my spin on the deck. Now, there are other variants out there, but I'll go over that in due time. Here, we're just going to sacrifice Unstable Gateway, and Cage Savage is something I love dropping on turn 1. It's a 0 attack, 6 health ally, but it becomes a real threat in this deck if you can get it to stick, which it likely will. We're sacrificing our Unstable Gateways. We only need one, so any extras you can safely sacrifice in this deck. The reason we run it is to grab Agnar. This is one of the only ways in the game to actually seek the Agnar. We sacrifice a Towering Brute here just because I feel like we already had 2. I feel like we don't necessarily need a second one. I play the Unstable Gateway, seek a Cage Savage. Now my next seek can actually seek out the Agnar. Our opponent here is playing pretty smart. You never want to chip away at the Cage Savage, or usually you don't want to, because that's going to increase the Cage Savage's attack. Every time it takes damage, it's going to gain an attack. So here we go ahead, we seek the Agnar, play Agnar. Now, let me just talk about what Agnar does for a second. So Agnar says, when a friendly Ravager ally enters play, all heroes and allies take 1 fire damage, and additionally, when a Ravager ally takes damage on your turn, it gains an attack. So just by playing Agnar and then Cage Savage, it triggers itself twice, so everything took 2 fire damage, and that buffed the Cage Savage, not only 1 from its ability when it takes damage it gains an attack, but also Agnar is giving it another attack, and all of a sudden we have a 4 attack, 4 health ally. Now, remember, this is a 1-cost ally. A 1-cost ally with 4 attack and 4 health. That is incredibly strong, and just... not a lot of decks can deal with that kind of early pressure that we're dealing here with Agnar and Cage Savage, and we even had a little bit of a slowdown because we had to play Unstable Gateway to seek out the Agnar. Now, I do want to say this deck doesn't do much without Agnar. When you don't draw into Agnar, you have like a 0-6 on your board, and you have like a a 1-5 on your board. So nothing gets crazy until the Agnar gets played, and so that's why it's so important to see our Agnar, and why we run stuff like Unstable Gateway just to make sure we're seeing Agnar every game. Here we just go ahead and clear our opponent's board. Now our opponent has nothing on the board, and we have a very strong field presence. Now, our opponent plays Southward Mercenary, and they've stored up a Moonstalker ability to a high level. This is actually how I would recommend playing Moonstalker. You just kind of don't use your ability until you can chain it multiple times in a row. That way you can protect your allies pretty well. So I choose not to sacrifice anything, because in this position, I feel like I don't want this Mercenary to get too strong, and especially with the continuous stealth, that could be a big problem for this deck. So instead, we do not sacrifice anything, and we're just going to play Twice Enchanted Robe here. This is going to help keep our health up a little bit, because it's going to absorb 4 damage, essentially, and also going to let us draw cards if our opponent decides to try and damage us. So here, our opponent plays the Almor Accelerator. That's going to give them Shadow Energy and let them chain the Moonstalker even more. Here we just go ahead and play Towering Brute. We skip Sacrifice again, just trying to chip away at this Mercenary, dealing 1 fire damage to everything with Agnar, and also drawing a card off of our Twice Enchanted Robe. That's part of the reason why Twice Enchanted Robe is such a good card in this deck. We essentially get to synergize with Agnar and draw a bunch of cards with Agnar there. Again, I really don't want this mercenary to get too strong, so I'm just going to play a winning move, play Thriss Assault Path. This is going to make it really dangerous for our opponent to not have stealth ever. And we're just biding our time here. I think our opponent probably should have tried to kill the Agnar or something in this position, because if you see our next turn, we're going to play Raikka's ability, and this is part of the reason why we run Raikka. Raikka says, at the start, until the start of your next turn, all damage to your friendly allies is reduced by 1, and all damage your allies deal is increased by 1. That includes Agnar's damage. So what Agnar is going to do is deal 1 to everything. Now with Raikka, it's dealing 2 to everything every time we summon a Ravager. Not only that, but our own allies don't get damaged because of Raikka's ability. So it synergizes extremely well. We can play the Rapacious Vermin and then the Feasterling. That deals 4 damage to everything our opponent has, and that's enough to kill the Mercenary and the Tactician. Now, we planned it out, and this is another important card in the deck. Thriss Assault Plinth is another way to just make your Caged Savages live, just get insane damage on the board. The problem is it has sustain 1 resource. So whenever you see sustain 1 CC, that really means sustain 1 card cost. And so if at the end of your turn, all of your resources are exhausted, you won't be able to exhaust any resources to pay for the sustain. It just means at the end of every turn, you have to pay for it. Since I couldn't pay for it, it's destroyed. Now, when it's destroyed, all opposing allies take 2 damage. So we were able to clear the Mercenary with a combination of 4 damage from Agnar and 2 damage from the Plinth. And here, our opponent really, there's nothing our opponent can do. We've got an insane board there. And so that just kind of shows you how powerful this deck can be. Now let's do one video where I talk about some of the counters, because yes, this deck is great, but we do want to talk a little bit about how this deck can fail, and what to watch out for. So Gravebone is a deck that you do definitely want to watch out for, and the reason is they run one of the best counters to this deck, in my opinion, which is Infernus. So we're going to go ahead and see what that looks like in this game here. Our goal is just going to be to kind of rush down the opponent with our Agnar strategy, because we've got our Feasterling here, so we can play our Feasterling. Feasterling is really a 3-attack, 3-health ally. It has sustained 1 HP, so you're going to be slowly draining your own health. Now that actually works really well with our twice enchanted Robe. And here is the counter, Infernus, which our opponent just discarded with their Mending Golem. Now, when this comes into play, it has immunity to fire damage. So what that means is it's actually immune to Agnar's ability, and that is actually a big problem for us. So our opponent's able to Lightning Strike away our Feasterling. Now, arguably here, I was actually kind of unsure what I should do. I was debating between summoning Towering Brute and playing the twice enchanted Robe. Reflectively, I definitely should have played the Towering Brute here. The logic that I used here, though, is I was really worried my opponent had Shadow Bolt. I didn't want Shadow Bolt to kill the Towering Brute, and so that's why I did not play Towering Brute, but frankly, that would probably have been my only way to deal with Infernus anyway. So I was definitely really greedy here by not playing Towering Brute. I think I just have to hope my opponent doesn't have Shadow Bolt and play it, because as you see, what happens next is going to just completely counter us. So our opponent goes ahead and brings out Voice of Winter, and then summons Infernus from grave. So I'm probably going to end this replay early, because I do just see if I can draw into anything. But really, once your opponent has this setup, the reason this is so deadly is not only does Infernus protect himself from fire damage, it increases the fire damage that opposing heroes and allies take by 1. So why this is so bad against this deck, or so difficult for our deck to deal with, is Agnar deals fire damage to yourself too. So now, all of a sudden, while Infernus is in play, Agnar is actually dealing 2 to everything you control. And that can really be hard to deal with. Not only can you not kill the Infernus with your Agnar, but it is also going to be hurting yourself. This card is the reason I am actually not running Supernova, and I'm not running Fireball. I think those 2 cards are really terrible against Infernus decks, and Infernus decks is the main thing that you're going to be watching out for when you're playing Agnar, because it is going to be what is going to really counter this deck in Furnace. So we can leave this replay a little early. There's not much else to see there. Anything else? So I did lose to a Lance there. I didn't have any draw power in that game. So I think it is a little important to establish your draw a little bit. This was not a mirror match. They were playing a Portal Raikka. They went first, and I think they probably smartly applied enough pressure that I couldn't deal with it in time. I want to see if I can find a mirror match. There are a lot of Raikkas on the board. Now, funnily enough, some of these Raikkas are not. Midsky was running, I believe, a wild Raikka with Portal, and that did not go so well. I think this is a mirror match. So let's watch this mirror match and see if there are any lessons we can take from the mirror match. So whenever you see Raikka, you gotta expect this deck, and as soon as you see Cage Savage here, so Cage Savage means this is another Agnar deck. So against another Agnar deck, I sacrifice Bad Santa. You do not want to be giving your opponent cards against this deck. It's one of the ways that this deck loses is by not having cards, and if you do something like Bad Santa, you're actually going to help them win the game. Now, I did something kind of interesting here. I did not play Feasterling. And I believe I sacrificed twice Enchanted Robe. I have 2 of them. I don't need 2 of them. The reason I don't play Feasterling is because my opponent has Feasterling. Now, Feasterling can activate its ability, gain 2 attack, and kill my Feasterling for essentially free. And Feasterling is not even good at absorbing damage because it pings you for 1 at the end of every turn because of its sustain. So there was just no reason for me to play Feasterling there. I would way rather have it be a resource. And so sometimes in this game, you actually don't play cards even when you can because it's more optimal to not play a card in a lot of situations. So that's why I don't play the Feasterling on turn 2. Now, our opponent just has the Nut Hand. They've got the Feasterling, they've got the Cage Savage, and now the Agnar. And you can see they're really putting on a huge threatening board here. So we've got to deal with it. Now, one nice thing about the Cage Savage... Okay, I wanted to pause here. It didn't quite pause. So one thing about the Cage Savage is the fact that when Agnar plays itself, it's actually going to ping your opponent's allies. And so Cage Savage is another counter to these Agnar decks. If you play your own Cage Savage, as we saw in that kind of trade, my Cage Savage took a damage, so it was at 1 attack, 5 health. Then I played the Thriss Assault Plinth. That gave it 2 more attack. Then with the 3 attack, I was able to attack his Cage Savage, damage it, and then at the end of the turn, because I have no resources left, a Thought Plinth destroyed itself, dealing 2 damage to everything my opponent controlled. So it's really important to clear your opponent's board, and that was one of the ways that I was able to do that pretty nicely. I chose not to clear the Agnar. Now, the reason I chose not to clear the Agnar is because Agnar is unique. So one thing you can try to do against Agnar decks is you can try to leave the Agnar on board, because then if they have another Agnar in hand, they can't play it. And yeah, I think the Cage Savage was a little bit more threatening than the Agnar, funnily enough, because I think Cage Savage kind of counters Agnar decks. And I don't really mind Agnar being out there on my opponent's side because as an Agnar deck, I want my allies to be pinged. And so his Agnar is actually helping ping my allies. Now our opponent has another Cage Savage, which is unfortunate. Plays it and is able to kill our Cage Savage. We're again going to sacrifice our Bad Santas. We don't need them. I go for Twice Enchanted Robe here. Now the reason is Twice Enchanted Robe is another way to completely counter your opponent's Agnar. Now, Agnar decks usually don't run any item destruction, so this is super safe to play. You don't really have to worry about anything that will destroy it. And you're going to be drawing a card every time you take damage. So Agnar basically is going to be fueling our draw here. And so that's why we play it while we can. Opponent does something kind of smart. They use the Raikka ability to prevent their own allies from taking damage. Now, the only issue here is they're fueling my hand. So I do have to be a little bit worried here because my opponent has a large board and could potentially really do a lot, but I just go ahead and just summon 2 allies, just kind of wait around, and I'm kind of lucky my opponent doesn't have Assault Plinth or something. That could have gone really badly if they had Assault Plinth there. But yeah, luckily we were able to just keep our 2 allies out, and here's where we can really go for a kill. And it sounds strange, but yes, this deck is so deadly that we could probably kill our opponent here. So we've got Agnar, we've got Cage Savage, and we've got Rapacious Vermin. That's going to be 3 triggers. So that's going to be +3 attack on both of these. Towering Brute is going to have +2 attack, and Cage Savage is going to have +3 attack. So just doing that, that's 8, 10 damage, plus the 3 from Agnar. And then we have Raikka. So I believe we can kill our opponent, or at least clear their board this turn. Okay, not quite kill. We can't kill them quite yet, but we can clear their board for sure. All we have to do is play Agnar and 2 more allies with the Raikka ability. So that might be what we do. Okay, we actually use the Agnar once just to make our Cage Savage and Towering Brute live, and then we use the Agnar with the Raikka to clear the rest of our opponent's board. Alright, so now we just have to hope our opponent doesn't draw into Fireball. That's the only thing they could play here, and luckily they don't, so that is enough to win the game. So against another Agnar deck, it is a little bit of a dicey matchup. It does often come down to, who can draw into more Cage Savages, more of the armor that kind of counters your opponent's Agnar, and also just kind of tempo. If your opponent can get a lot of tempo out there, then that can be really bad for you. But that is the mirror match. Now, the only last thing I do want to talk about is another counter to this deck. It's Elementalis. Sometimes I do win against Elementalis, so it's not a complete counter. But, for example, Sam I Am is running a really strong Elementalis list. Essentially, Elementalis is so strong against Agnar because you can give your own ally a lot of health, and that's actually really hard for this deck to deal with, anything with a high amount of health. So if you are running against a lot of Elementalis, you're going to want to put in Shadow Ball into your deck if you're running the Raikka Agnar. But that's basically the only other deck I consistently had trouble with. I guess Baduru can sometimes be a problem, and Amber got a game against me too. But again, overall, your win rate is going to be very high with this deck. I've only played Raikka here, and I'm 28-12, so yeah, I don't know what win rate that is. It will calculate it for us. If we go to tournament, okay, now it's contacting server. Okay, it's a little slow here. So, but anyway, what I was going to say is we've got a really high win rate. We've won way more games than we've lost, and so I think this deck is very, very strong. Okay, server is processing. I think the server is just, okay, very good. It just resolved. Okay, so a 70% win rate, which honestly is a little lower than expected. Then again, 70% is still very good. So overall, I would say, it's not that hard to counter this deck. You can run stuff like fire allies, anything immune to fire. You can run stuff that has a large amount of ally removal. I don't think that's actually the best counter. Elementalis is another counter to this deck. And that's probably why I think you don't see that many Raikkas on the leaderboard. Okay, you do see some. The other reason you're not going to see a lot of Raikkas on the leaderboard is probably because Agnar is a very expensive card, and it's almost always sold out. So if we go to Agnar, it's sold out. So you can't even buy it. The only way to get it, Agnar right now, is there are 2 ways. The first way is to go and grab a pack. Now, you get packs for 25 wins. Every time you get 25 wins with a 4-max deck, you get 1 pick a card. Then you go to shadowarrow.com/pack or something like that. I'll have to look up the actual link. Then you can redeem Agnar, and you can get a foil Agnar. So that is one way. The second way is to buy packs. So you can go and buy campaign packs. Click buy there, and hopefully you'll pull an Agnar. It's pretty rare, so okay, yeah, we didn't pull it. But yeah, I think Statistically speaking, you have to pull a lot of packs to pull Agnar, so it's not the best method. I think if you want a playset, it's something like 200 packs, so that is a lot of packs to pull. So I highly recommend just doing the 4-card contest and getting pick a cards. That's going to be the main way to pick up Agnar. Again, I think most people probably don't have Agnar, so you're not seeing it in the leaderboards for that reason. And then the second reason is because so many people are running counters to Agnar. That is another reason why it's not dominating the leaderboard. But make no mistake, this is a very strong deck that does a lot of damage very quickly. So without further ado, let's actually go over the deck. We've got 4 Caged Savages, 4 Rapacious Vermins, 4 Feasterlings, 4 Agnars, and 4 Towering Brutes. This is just the standard lineup. I mean, we run aggressive decks, so we run the low-cost Ravager allies, Feasterling and Rapacious Vermin, and Caged Savage. So we just need those 12 allies, 4 Agnars, of course, and then 4 Towering Brute is an amazing card with Agnar. It just becomes a 5/5 that prevents haste from going off. So that's another really powerful effect that actually is really relevant in a lot of matchups. Next, 4 Bad Santas. I think, again, one of the ways this deck loses is if you run out of draw and your opponent is able to have a lot of ally removal. So you need to get your draw going and keep your draw going. Bad Santa works really well because we run a 1-cost card, Caged Savage. So, of course, you can drop the Caged Savage on turn 1, turn 2, play Bad Santa. That's always really, really strong, especially when you're going first. But Bad Santa has a lot of applications. Maybe you run out of cards in your hand, then you can play Bad Santa, and it keeps you in the game. Thriss, Assault Plinth. Now, this is a strange card to play, and honestly, I'm a little bit mixed about it. I don't think you need to play this card. I might even replace it with Shadow Bolt, because it's kind of win more. But there are certain cases where Assault Plinth comes in handy. So for that reason, I kind of like it. It gives 2 attack to every Ravager ally, and that's just really nice. And especially if you go kind of and strategically play at the right time, you can have it destroy itself and deal 2 to everything your opponent controls. So that's nice too. I actually think you need to play this card in this deck because a lot of my losses before I was running Unstable Gateway were to not drawing Agnar. I think drawing Agnar is so crucial in this deck. If you don't draw Agnar, you have 12 allies that honestly suck. Like, these 12 do nothing for you alone. These 4 Towering Brutes are also, I mean, they're okay, but it's just, you know, average at best. So you need to see Agnar to make this deck even, like, remotely good. This is really the what carries the deck. And whenever you have a deck that is carried by one single card, I think it's just so important to see it that you have to run cards that let you see it. So Unstable Gateway does that for us. The first seek does not seek Agnar. That's important to note because it seeks an ally with cost X or less, where X is the durability. So your first time you play this card, you have to seek something like Feasterling or Rapacious Vermin or Caged Savage. I usually seek Caged Savage because I think it's the best out of the 12 low-cost allies we run. So the first time you play Unstable Gateway, you seek the Caged Savage as you play it. Then the next turn you seek the Agnar. And then you have Agnar and Caged Savage in hand. So for turn 4, you can play the Agnar, then the Caged Savage. That's really, really strong, especially with Raikka's ability. You can deal 4 to your opposing side and have an Agnar and Caged Savage live for your next play. So Unstable Gateway is really, really good. Great turn 3 play, especially when you don't have the Agnar and your Caged Savage combo in hand. Of course, if you draw into Agnar, you can probably sacrifice these, and that's no big deal. Twice Enchanted Robe is an amazing card, especially if you feel like your opponent has some removal. You might not be able to rush them down. Twice Enchanted Robe just is so insane in this deck because every time you play a Ravager with Agnar out, you're going to get to draw a card. Now, this was a strange choice. I went with Mount Kazarr over Shadow Bolt. The reason I went with this card over Shadow Bolt is I just like the fact that it's repeatable, so you can really use this multiple times. Every turn, you can use it one time. And it just says a friendly damaged Ravager ally attacks the opposing ally with lowest health. So this is our counter to stuff like Elementalis. It's our counter to stuff like Infernus. This is how we're going to be dealing with that most of the time. Now, of course, I feel like it's not enough. So if I were going to change this deck list, I would probably replace these 4 cards with 4 Shadow Bolts. I think Shadow Bolt really helps against this deck's bad matchups. Now, the +1 Shadow Energy is not terribly relevant in this deck, but it's kind of nice. Then, you know, Raikka's ability is really good, and maybe you can use Unstable Gateway a little bit more. So yeah, I would definitely add in some Shadow Bolts and remove the Thriss Thought Plinths. And the only reason is because of the meta we're in, where there's a lot of Agnar counters. So that's probably what I would do. Some other things you can consider that I chose not to use, but obviously are very good. Fireball. If you run fireballs, that's another way to just kind of kill your opponent even after your early rush fails. Supernova, another way to just kind of rush down your opponent afterwards. And I removed both of these from my list. I don't like Supernova and I don't like Fireball. Now, why? It's because of all the counters I'm seeing, and one of the major counters I'm seeing is allies that are immune to fire. I'm seeing a lot of Infernus, but there are other allies that are immune to fire too. There's also this guy, Flameborn Defiler. This is another card that is immune to fire. So a lot of people are running this. A lot of people are running Armed Pack Beast. They're running stuff that is just really hard to kill with fire damage. And so that's why Fireball and Supernova don't really work. If you run into a counter, it's just not going to do anything for you. And that's why I think Shadow Ball is a little bit better than something like Fireball or Supernova in this current meta. As long as people are going to be running those Agnar counters, you need to be running the counter to their counter. Otherwise, I think, you know, maybe you can try some other cards, but this is a pretty solid list. I'm running 4 copies of every card, partially just because of the monthly contest of 4 max. So I think because of the monthly contest, we're running 4 of everything. If we weren't, you could run some tech cards. So there are some tech cards I would probably run. Maybe something like... I think this card would be pretty good as a 1 of or a 2 of even, just because there's Baduru and some other weapon heroes and armor heroes that can kind of get in the way of your strategy. Especially Baduru can kill and pick off your allies pretty easily with his weapon, so something like Disarming Personality would go really well in this deck to kind of counter Baduru. Of course, you don't want to be running Disarming Personality in a 4 max deck, because then you have to run 4 Disarming Personalities, and there's just not enough weapon heroes out there to justify that. You'd be drawing into it way too often and bricking yourself. Anyway, that is the deck list, and now I'm just gonna do a quick shout out. Last video, I also shouted out my GameFound campaign. I just wanted to thank everybody who has been following. A few days ago, we were only on 80 subscribers, and now we have 93 people following the campaign. So if you are at all interested, please go to gamefound.com/project/jzgames/chromamix, or you can just go to chromamix.com. I will link it at the description of this video. If you go to this page and click follow and then create an account and just sign up with Google or put in your email or do whatever, and just basically follow the page, that really helps out the algorithm, and it will give you notifications when the game has updates. So that is my one plug for today. Otherwise, that was Agnar. Hope you enjoyed this video. I hope it helps you get some wins and understand the meta that we are in. I think right now you kind of have to be playing Agnar or a counter to Agnar. If you're not playing a counter to Agnar, you're just going to get destroyed by this kind of deck. And it's going to be kind of miserable because this is such a powerful deck that you just really have no chance against it when it drops the Caged Savage, then the Rapacious Vermin, then the Agnar. If you're not running something that can counter that somehow, you're just going to lose. So this is really a defining deck of the meta. I highly recommend playing it. I highly recommend playing some of the counters we were talking about. And that's all I have for you today. So what do you think of Agnar? Have you played around with this deck? Have you tried out some new things? Let me know in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching.